So shall we get started?
Indeed. So, those of you that are here with us, thank you so very much. I'm gratified that you're joining us, and hopefully many of you know me and my friend Dr. Tara Reck. She has been teaching mental health and related topics for over 17 years. She's a licensed psychologist, a fantastic human being with whom I have a lot of conversations that are very meaningful. And I really wanted her to join me in this. Also, you should know that she has a private practice working with individuals as well as couples with a specialization in working with creatives. So she's, and is absolutely a creative herself. So here we go. Thank you, Tara. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Yay, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm very excited to be doing this with you and finding a way to reach out to people in their homes and try to offer some words of encouragement and ways of thinking about this time with you. I'm so happy that you invited me to do this so we could be thinking together about it. So should we introduce our focus today?
Yes, please. Yes. And I will say that when we began talking about doing this open conversation, it was a few weeks ago. And at that point, the confinement felt like it was never ending. Like we didn't know how long this was going to be. And the uncertainty of everything felt even heavier than it does right now. Here in California, we're looking at step by step the doors opening. So the focus of the conversation is slightly different than when we ideated the conversation. But nonetheless, I think a slightly different layer has come into this too, because as we are preparing to physically go back to workplaces, doors are opening. I think there's a whole host of anxieties that are coming up. So,
absolutely. Yeah, well, I really enjoyed starting a conversation with you, Autumn, and thinking about just the nature of fear and uncertainty and how to think about it, how it affects our thinking capacity. And one of the things that we were talking about when we began speaking about this was thinking about just how the experience of uncertainty affects our way of thinking and our nervous systems. And, you know, the tendency when we're afraid to go to places where we began thinking in black and white terms. And we go into a place of doing things that can be harmful to ourselves and others in terms of how we think and how we act. And this is an unprecedented time. Like I have been fascinated and freaked out myself as a psychologist to kind of watch my own experience as well as the experience of my friends and my patients and my colleagues, everybody around us, what it's like to go to the grocery store, for example, which was never it was an unpleasant experience at times, but never a frightening experience. And I've been really interested just to watch and observe all the things that are happening. And this, feels to me like a time of extreme uncertainty. Everything that we think we were familiar with is now kind of up in the air, and we don't really know how things are going to be. And navigating that uncertainty on a regular basis is a tremendous challenge. It also feels like an opportunity at times, to step out of those boxes that we've created, our boxes of expectations, and to see if we can manage our fear well enough that we don't just stick with black and white thinking and try to think creatively, and how to take this as an opportunity to, first of all, recognize our interdependence as human beings and to recognize that we're all in this together. I mean, this is an incredible mirror for all of us. I mean, nobody's free of this,
Right.
And
yeah. Yes, absolutely. Every human on the globe is currently being affected on one level or another, to one extreme or another. And I read something, someone saying, well, we're not all in the same boat, but we are at least in the same ocean.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Beautiful way to
My
put
boat looks really different to a lot of other people's boats, but
it. Yeah, but we are on an ocean. I like the ocean metaphor too, because it speaks to, in a way, for me, like I think of the ocean as really being a great metaphor for our emotional state.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get completely drowned in it. Other times we can sort of sit on it. We can ride it like a surfboard. But I really like that metaphor. It's a great metaphor.
I like it better than what I have mostly been saying is, it's a roller coaster. There are highs and lows, and sometimes it's really fast and sometimes it's really calm, but even the calm, you're terrified because something is coming up. But with an ocean, unlike a roller coaster, there are those moments where you can float for a moment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I think about, it's interesting because thinking about my own nervous system, and of course there being time, I've had to find ways to stay calm so that I can help others. It's always one of the challenges of my profession. And what's interesting is to be going through this at the same time as my patients.
Right.
Normally there's a buffer when other people are suffering. Hopefully I've got some balance in my life. People depend on me. And so I can find a way, to take in the experience of others and find a way to be with it without it overwhelming me. In this situation, there's been days and weeks where I may be like up to here in how much I can take. And then I take in so much more, and I'm finding out how to do that and how to really work with my own nervous system, how to keep myself calm and balanced, under really extreme circumstances.
Right. So you can continue to hear your clients and to be able to help them.
Yeah. And some of them are, people on the front lines. And so I feel very strongly that I want to show up for them and really be there for them so that they can do their good work. I also have noticed during this time, my own experience, the experience of my patients and couples. I work with couples as well as individuals. And I would say, I'm sure many of you out there would agree with this, that this level of uncertainty and fear and anxiety can very profoundly affect our capacity to relate. And in particular around differences. For example, the things that I may do to feel safe may be very different than the things that you need to do to feel safe. And when you're in a state of fear and uncertainty and you're trying to find a way to be safe, those differences start to really feel like a bad thing. And so couples, families, differences in these really intimate relationships are often the hardest to navigate in times like this.
And interestingly, I'm going to bring our furry family into that conversation too, because I've actually noticed that I'm having to navigate the anxiety of our two cats. Because Gray Cat gets really stressed out because he's super empathetic. And I'll be actually kind of sailing through the day pretty okay. And suddenly I'm really, really agitated. And I look down and the cat's next to me. I'm like, somebody needs to be picked up and held. Okay. So, I don't know. Yeah. God, you're supposed to be comfort for me. What?
I'm sure. Yeah, and whether it's just,
we all have like a different level. Like as you're saying, like sometimes we reach this point of fullness and something will tip it over. And I think those moments of the fullness and then getting to tip it over are really important too. Like just some of my dealing with my anxiety is to just have a momentary cry, just like, blah, get it all out. And then there's a room again for the day to fill up that intensity. But as you were saying, yeah, in my coupleness, my tears really concern Daniel. So I'll have to be like, no, just blowing off steam. We're good. So communication through all of this has been, I don't know, I think everyone is finding that communication is the thing that is highest on the list, as it always is. Like, communication is the most important thing in everything we do, and in times of heightened worry, here we go.
Yeah,
It's even more
it's
so.
interesting. As a therapist, I'm going to say something about that, and then give you a little bit of backdrop for it. I'm a talk therapist, right? So my preference is indeed to go at verbal and communicate. But I have to say that in my work with couples and thinking about people's nervous systems, sometimes people need to not talk for a while, which is like, some, yeah. And so yes, verbal and communication, sometimes just like not talking and just maybe being hugged, maybe going nonverbal, maybe keeping it inside, but doing something else to take care of yourself. And so I'm using this as an example to say that I think in times of fear and uncertainty, one of the most important things, and this is true really of any experience of suffering that anybody might be feeling at any point in time, is getting to know your own nervous system. And what helps you, get off the edge of the cliff is really important. So, depending on your emotional state, for one person, it might be, I need to talk about it, I need to write it down, or I need to have a conversation. And usually then you're with a partner who prefers not to verbalize, maybe as a way to feel safe in that moment. So that's when you get to discover the differences. I'm speaking from experience. But figuring out like, okay, so let me just back up and say, when I talk about managing your nervous system, this has to do with how our brains work. So we share part of our brains with reptiles, and this is the emotional center of our brain. It's the oldest part of our brain. It's the part that is basically trying to determine whether somebody is a friend or a foe. And that's it. It's very black and white. And, we need to make a determination at times, especially when we're in a state of fear or we're trying to deal with something quickly, is we need to decide, okay, is this a friend? Is this an enemy or a friend? And that is it from that state of being. This is the state that we go in when we're in crisis. It's the state that we go in when, we're feeling anxiety and fear. And it's also the state that we're in when we're in like high conflict with our partner or dealing with a teenager that might be upsetting us.
Or
yeah, exactly.
Anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when this happens, when we go into what we would call reptilian brain, it's not a time to make thoughtful decisions. It's not a time to make good decisions, in fact, beyond determining whether somebody's a friend or a foe. But usually if you're doing that with somebody you love, you've just turned them into a black and white object, and you're going to miss out on all the nuances. So when you're in a state where I would call it a flooded state, the most important thing at that moment is to figure out how to get yourself off the cliff. To stop all action, don't make decisions at this time, try to calm yourself down. And that's the first thing. I've taught a lot about crisis intervention. I used to work at an art school. I was the director of counseling. And so everybody always wanted to have workshops on crisis intervention because, there was always a lot of stuff going on at art school. And so this was like the step one of any crisis situation, is to get to a place where you can calm your nervous system. This is not what we're prone to do under states of crisis or uncertainty. What we're prone to do is to want to join in to whatever that feeling is. We think, we're kind of herd animals, and so our brains want to resonate with those around us, and we want to immediately throw ourselves into the same state of being of those around us. So, for example, you go to the grocery store, people are freaking out about something, and you find yourself getting activated because of that herd animal situation, how our brains tend to resonate at the same level of those around us. So the first thing you want to do is to try to calm it down, and then your capacity to think in a more nuanced manner will come back online. And so that's always the first thing you want to do. People do this in different ways, so I want to ask you, Autumn, what do you do to help calm yourself down when you're starting to feel anxious?
Oh, when this, I call it when the squirrels are at their most evil, and squirrels running around. Sometimes they're in my head. Sometimes I can feel them running around in my chest. And it's breath. I'm just remembering to breathe, because when we tend to get all worked up, this happens, and and that makes it hard to access any kind of higher thinking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Breathing is always an excellent place to start for most people, because first of all, you have to breathe. So it's something that happens constantly. It's a point of attention. There's always an in and an out. And also when we get anxious, that's usually the first thing to go, is we start breathing more shallow. We're not getting enough oxygen, so that is always a great place to start. I'm sure that many of you watching this have techniques for breathing, or can access that online, or find methods that work. So that is always the first place to start. We often don't even realize that we've stopped breathing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a really great way of doing it. I also want to say something while we're discussing what gets us wound up, about something called the negativity bias, because this is huge. And I think it's really freeing to understand this in terms of, our neuropsychology. So there's a part of our brain that stubbornly likes to overemphasize the negative. And it's actually the thing that helped us survive at one point in time in evolution. So back when our ancestors were out on the African savannah, you would stroll down to the watering hole, right, along with all the other animals. And, you go down to the watering hole and you see a friend of yours get hauled off by a lion, all right? Terrifying experience. Next day comes and you decide you're going to go back to this watering hole because that's where you get your water. So our ancestors that went on down to the watering hole and just tried to forget about it. It was a one-off situation. It's not going to happen again. Guess what happened to them? They got hauled off by a lion too. The ancestors of ours that never forgot the time that person got hauled off by a lion, they never forgot it because it was dangerous. There was a really bad consequence. Those are our ancestors that survived, and we still have the legacy in our brains of never forgetting that one bad situation. So unfortunately, what this means is that we never forget the negative, but we have a hard time holding on to the positive. So our brains are going to overemphasize the negative in most situations. The good news is, through the field of positive psychology, there's been a tremendous amount of research on this aspect of our brain chemistry and how our brains work. And it's become clear that through conscious, focused effort, needs to be conscious, focused effort, we can start to change the nature of that balance of our brain. So first of all, just knowing that it's very natural to overemphasize the negative is really helpful for so many humans. It's like, oh, gee, I always go negative. Well, yeah, that's because you had particularly strong.
Survive.
Yeah, survive. You had a strong link to your ancestors. Bravo, right? That helped you at one point. We're no longer going to the watering hole, so now it just creates a lot of stress-related illnesses. It messes with your relationships. It leads to depression. It's not a good thing. But it's a kind of a natural phenomenon of the brain. So one of the ways that you can change this dynamic is through conscious, focused effort. And some of the research that has been done around this shows that there's a couple of practices that you can do. One are gratitude practices. So
that one has been so important in my life. Like when I was really, really spinning out about all of this, and the days where I just didn't want to get out of bed, like the gratitude practice is the thing that actually lifted me up from under the covers. Okay, yes, this moment feels terrible. I have a lot to be grateful for.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, some of you may be thinking, that feels like a Pollyanna thing, it's,
Right.
what, doing lip service to what's good. No, the only way that this works is if you can actually churn up, call up the feeling of goodness. That is what changes the brain neurochemistry. You need to be able to, for example, if you're doing a gratitude practice where you're just kind of going through it in a rote manner, not going to have any effect. But if you can sit for a minute and think about something that actually brings up a positive feeling for you, if you can
Mhm.
access that and let it percolate. They talk about, again, in the field of positive psychology, they talk a lot about aerating the lawn. Like, you want to kind of like let it sink in so that it can nourish the grass. And so you need
Mhm.
to be able to access the feeling of it and then let it grow. Like, let that feeling really permeate your body, your mind. And that is what helps change that balance of the brain. It's the feeling state. So it doesn't matter what it is that you're focusing on that you feel happy about, or you feel good about it, that you appreciate. It could be the same thing every single day. Like, you might see your cat roll over on its back and do its cute little thing. And that just brings up a nice feeling inside. You can use it every day. If that's what feels good for you, use it.
Like
um,
when I have to watch cat videos, like I've got perfectly
so,
good cats next to me, but a whole slew of cats doing adorable things will also change that over. I'm seeing a lot of comments about people reaching out to friends, and I think that feeling of friendship as part of this practice of shifting from negativity to a feeling of joy. I, I think that's a piece.
I'm so glad that you're bringing that up. That's on my list, and it's super important. Yeah, I'll just read through this list and then we can talk more about it. So, gratitude practices, that's one of them. The next one is limiting negative input. All right, this is really huge, guys, because again, the part of our brain that wants to make sure we're not getting hauled off by a lion is also the part of our brain that keeps reading the news like 20 times a day to stay abreast of
Definitely.
everything.
How many people died today? How many people died today? How many people died in the last 20
Yeah,
minutes?
yeah,
Does
yeah.
it help us?
No, no. You need to, again, pay attention to your nervous system. And when you're getting overloaded, you want to reach the point where you're not overloaded. You don't want to get overload. So probably you don't want that to be the first thing that you do every morning. You want to get up and think about something that you're looking forward to. Relax, maybe, kiss your wife or husband or kids good morning. Maybe if you're going to check the news, like, do it a little bit later. Give yourself a chance to set, so that you're approaching the day in a positive way. But really think about limiting negative input. Don't overload yourself. And again, the idea is that, if something bad's out there, I need to keep it in my consciousness at all times, then I'll feel safe. What you're doing is you're just extending the negative experience so that it just takes over every waking minute. And so you're living the worst case scenario all the time. Again, back to the negativity bias with the idea that's going to help you survive. But really what it does is it negatively affects your nervous system. It also affects, your ability to deal with diseases, in fact, because it does affect, your whole system in a very negative way. So
Right.
you want to
It's
stay
in your system.
psychologically and physically. Yeah. The next one is connection with loved ones, which of course is a very difficult thing right now because we're all you know stuck, separated.
Right. Yes.
It's
Connecting
such-
this through this. Is this two-dimensional? It's not one-dimensional, uh, but it's not 3D, right? And I know that a number of the people that have tuned in are actually living by themselves and maybe also don't have pets. So
yeah.
finding finding other ways to reach out for this kind of support and friendship and feeling that we're still okay and that we're not actually alone in the world.
Yeah.
It
I
can.
had a friend say something to me, just a brief disclosure. So I was in a long-term relationship that ended in October, and I hadn't been single for many years, 15 years. And I was, sitting in the house by myself. And the breakup happened right before the power went out in Northern California for 3 solid days. I didn't have power for 3 days. So I was sitting here in the dark, feeling sorry for myself. I didn't even know where to find the flashlights. And I stupidly didn't realize I could still use my gas stove. So I was like,
And I can't even cook.
I can't even cook. My neighbor had to tell me 3 days later, oh, well, you know, you can still use your gas stove. So I'm like, what can I eat, right? Anyway, I called up a friend and I was in a bit of a panic and I was like, oh my God, you know, I'm so alone. And she said, you know what? She goes, you live alone now, but you're not alone. You're not alone.
Wise friend. Thanks, friend.
I know. And she said,
Right.
you know, you're in my mind. She lives in New York, dear friend. She goes, you know, basically you're in my mind. And even if we're not talking to each other and you are literally alone in that home by yourself, you're not alone. And that just like, it just tapped into that potential universal connection of being all of us being in this together. I think that's part of the reason why we're all seeking those lovely videos, you know, like those original videos of the Italians who are all in their houses, you know, singing together, you know, on their balconies. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, they're finding ways, creative ways to connect, even if they can't touch each other, even if they, you know, and it's like a reminder that we're all in this together. And I think that that is so therapeutic, as well as, you know, in addition to the connection, but also some sort of level of meaningful engagement, to feel like there's a meaningful dimension to that connection, you know, whether it's with other people or something that you're working on yourself, you know, which brings me to another thing that you and I had discussed. I'm sure we'll be doing another seminar on this, and it has to do with creativity.
Yeah.
It's a way of being meaningfully connected. Some of us having a hard time being creative right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I am. I just realized that, so I did make a poll, which hopefully people can find, but I did forget that that was one of the topics that we wanted to bring up, but yeah.
Yeah, so we're about 30 minutes in. Maybe we'll continue on for a bit and then we'll open it up for some questions. What do you think?
So yes, absolutely. And I think you have we covered have I allowed you to cover the 4 points?
Well, the one other thing that I would maybe add to the points that we wanted to hit on is something that has to do with experiencing the suffering of others. So a lot of people who are attuned and care about other humans can feel very overwhelmed right now. Even if you're in a relatively safe situation, I say relatively, but you know, let's say you've got a roof over your head, you've got food and shelter, and you know, maybe you have a job, which is a lot, but you're aware of the suffering of others, those that you love. You know, they're close to you, as well as just, frankly, the entire planet. All right. So there's universal suffering. There always is universal suffering, but there's a sense of being tapped into it in a kind of extreme way right now. And one of the things I want to say about that is that part of the challenge in getting to the place where you can begin to focus on the positive, you know, we were talking earlier about how good that is for your nervous system, how important it is in terms of your mental and physical health, how important it is for good thinking to occur. You know, to get out of black and white thinking, you really need to be able to focus on the positive and aerate the lawn, take in the positive. What if you're a caring person and you are really attuned to universal suffering and you're feeling it deeply, you know, all right? So one of the things I can say about that is that there's this phenomenon that occurs, I certainly feel it, and it's a phenomenon called survivor guilt. So if you're the one who's doing okay and other people around you are getting sick and dying, there can be tremendous guilt associated with being the one who's doing well. Yeah. And that can make it really difficult for you to feel gratitude, to feel joy, you know, to feel the goodness of what is available to you in your life in this present moment. And it feels like when you tap into that survivor guilt, you know, that is harmful somehow to those around you that are suffering. If you are enjoying yourself, that means you're in a position of privilege. That means that you are hurting them. That really what you should be doing is plunging into the suffering along with other people, and that is somehow going to be helpful to them. Now, I disagree with that pretty profoundly, because in my experience of working with humans and also being a therapist for, 22 years, is that throwing myself into a state of negativity and suffering um, does nothing to help those around me. I'm not talking about being insensitive to what's happening. I think it's very important that we be able to understand and feel what others feel. But my ability to offer something and to offer something in value does depend in part on my ability to feed myself. I need to be able to be balanced enough that I have some resources to offer people. And if I have now overwhelmed myself and thrown myself, into it, into the abyss, I'm not going to have anything to offer. So it's really important, if you are a person who's interested in helping others, if you're interested in, even if it's just providing good thinking, to make sure that you are aware of things like survival guilt, and oh, okay, there it is. There's that guilt. I feel terrible about having good things, and recognize it for what it is, that does come up. And then to recognize also that you can maintain your awareness without having to be in the same emotional state as those that are suffering in those ways. And that you want to be able to tap into your ability to maintain balance so that you can make a difference and provide something. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense to me. I've got two thoughts kind of fighting with each other, wanting to come out. One of them is that survival guilt can kind of relate to self-worth, like who am I to, why me? Why am I still alive? Or like my own recollection of the fires a couple of years ago. Like, San Francisco, sure, the air was bad, but we still all had homes. And, everyone was afraid to have a good time about anything because of that guilt. But did it help anything? It actually hurt San Francisco a lot. And whereas if we'd been able to say, yeah, great, we've got it good, how can we help? Welcome other people into our homes or whatever thing. And then the other thought that's coming up at the same time is getting through the survival guilt, or just getting through any of this, is, as you were saying, feed yourself. And you're not talking necessarily about food. You're talking about self-care. Yeah. For some people, it does have to be food. For other people, it's, putting on red lipstick or whatever a thing it is, or taking a minute to, I've seen a lot of people talking about what does help them, and that's going outside if they happen to have access to a garden. That's huge. Breathing some fresh air. I mean, I know that I probably went a week straight where I didn't leave the building, and realized that I was starting to look a little wan, and definitely to feel it. And I could feel like all of this, like, oh, the worry.
And what a lovely red lipstick that is, by the way. Really fabulous. You always wear the best reds, I have to say. You have the red down.
My guardian mama taught me that red lipstick really, it can change a day. So, I know that women during the Second World War, that lipstick was high commodity because, it changes everyone's perception of you, changes your perception of yourself.
Yes. Yeah. I would not argue the merits of the red lipstick for sure. And we all need to know what it is that'll help lift us up. And clearly that's one of the things for you. Right. Yeah. So, so just to summarize, and then maybe we can go and take some questions. We were talking about the challenges of uncertainty, fear, and anxiety, and how it impacts your nervous system. You want to get to know your own nervous system and to realize that if you're going to black and white thinking, probably, when you're doing the friend or foe kind of thinking, probably what's happening is you're in lizard brain and you want to try to calm your nervous system. It's the first thing you want to do. People have different ways of doing that. Autumn, you talked about breathing, and that's always a great place to start. I'm sure many of you out there have a variety of practices, whether it be getting some fresh air, air just seems like a really amazing commodity these days. Getting some exercise, these are all things that can help calm your nervous system. Limiting negative input, especially if you're starting to feel overwhelmed and you're noticing you're having a hard time with the sort of gray area thinking. Finding connection with your loved ones in whatever way that you can, so that you don't feel so alone, that you can remember that connection. Finding ways to have meaningful engagement in your life. What are the things that are meaningful to you, and allow yourself to do those things. You want to be able to cultivate integrated living practices, ways that help you bring mind, body, spirit together. I spend a lot of time as a talking head these days, on Zoom. And so I have to move a lot. Like I have taken up jogging, which is shocking. I hate to jog, but it feels so good at the end of my day when I've been sitting on Zoom all day to throw on my shoes and just run out the door. It's incredible. And so you want to be able to and also we talked about the negativity bias and how the brain really is prone to overemphasize the negative. And this is a way of sort of helping to depathologize that in all of us. Like, yeah, our brains, we love that stuff. This is why negative campaigning is always so effective. We're always looking for.
Oh my gosh.
We leap onto the negative. We love that stuff. Unfortunately, it also leads to all sorts of othering and inhumane practices and how we handle all sorts of things. So we want to try to change the balance of that negativity bias and to try to fill ourselves up with more positive, especially during times like this when we're really being challenged.
Yeah. Kind of in the spirit of summarizing that, like the limiting negativity, I think one of my biggest tools for that one is, as you're saying, definitely don't start your day with it. Finding a very positive way to start your day, and it probably doesn't involve the phone, right? Like that shouldn't be the first thing you reach for. Yeah. And if the things around you that are accessible to you don't happen to be other living creatures, I don't know, like what might be the best thing, like fresh air, like go open a window.
Well, I think this is where it's really helpful, to spend a little time allowing yourself to see what comes up for yourself in terms of what feels good to you, so to really because everybody has a different recipe for this. Like I don't have a prescription for it. And when I'm working with somebody individually, or as a couple even, or a family around this, the first thing I do is ask people what they typically do. Like, what do you typically do to help yourself feel good? And if it's something that seems like it makes them feel good and it's a healthy enough practice, because certainly we may turn to if it's something that you're already doing that works for you, great, and it's healthy enough, excellent, do that. And I like to find out, try to find out what are some things you're already doing, and then if you really lack some things, there's a variety of things you want to think about. You want to think about getting your body moving, because we're all spending way too much time confined, so this is part of the reason why we're all being advised to try to get out and exercise, in places where it feels safe to do that, or inside your own home. I've been doing a lot of dancing in my house. Some of you may have seen my videos of just any kind of movement, the best thing to do. But I'm a
down.
But whatever it is that helps you feel safe. I mean, that's the other thing, because there is so much fear and uncertainty, to really get to know, spend some time thinking about this. What are the things that help you feel safe? And again, it may be different than the things that your partner may feel safe around, or your family, or your son or your daughter, or anybody else in your household, if you are sharing a household with other people, roommates, etc. You might even want to consider getting together and talking about it. Like, what is it that helps you feel safe? This is what helps me feel safe. And then thinking about how you can come together around some of those things and really help each other. Yeah. So it looks like we're starting to get some questions in our Q&A.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to cover a very, very important, the shade and brand of my red lipstick. It's called Pioneer by Maybelline. Got that out of the way now.